Hey there, this is Christine. Thanks for tuning into my Mostly Keto Kitchen. What I would like to talk about today is starch. And this is building on some previous videos where we talked about some other carbohydrates. So specifically, we talked about sucrose and how sucrose is a combination of a glucose and a fructose. And we also talked about fiber and how fiber is polysaccharides, so multiple sugars all linked together. And there were multiple types, insoluble and soluble, etc. So why I want to talk about starch is because this is the main type of carbohydrate that we eat, and this is what provides glucose through our diet. Now, keep in mind, we make glucose, right? Glucose is the molecule that's so important that our livers can make it, and so that's why going low carb or even no carb is okay, because our bodies can make glucose. But we have evolved eating glucose, we've evolved eating starch, and it's a really normal thing for us. So what I want to start with here is this little body that I've got behind me. And what I've written up at the top there, it says that the maximum amount of glucose that's in our blood is about 5 grams. And so 5 grams is really a pretty small amount. So maybe think of it as being about the amount that's in a teaspoon. So in our whole body, which is about 5 liters of blood, we've got about a teaspoon worth of glucose at any given time. And that's actually even a little bit on the high side. Most of us tend to run, if we're healthy, we tend to run maybe a little bit lower than that even. So I'm going to talk a little bit about specific nutrition labels and foods and the amount of carbohydrate that are in some foods. But before we do that, let's look at the structure of starch. And so I've got kind of an abbreviated structure here of starch on the board. And so by abbreviated, I mean I don't have all the atoms showing. But I did draw in one that we don't typically show, and that's this little hydrogen sitting here. But why I wanted to show you that is because I want you to see that the main difference between starch and cellulose is just the location of that little hydrogen. If the little hydrogen is going up like that and the oxygen's going down, then that's the structure of starch. And so this is just glucoses linked together, but they're linked through this link that goes downward, and that's what's called an alpha bond. Now, cellulose, this is just switched. So the H is going down, the oxygen's going up, but it's still just glucoses linked together. And here, I'll show you a picture. The difference that this little directionality causes is massive, and so the structure of starch tends to be more of a helix, and the structure of cellulose is more like long strands that then form sheets, which then make it so fibrous. And this is part of why I just really like chemistry so much, is because such a subtle little change like that has this massive impact on what the overall structure of these big molecules are. And then it also impacts our bodies, and that is that we can digest starch. We're able to break those little glucose molecules up off of the starch, whereas in cellulose that just comes into our body, it's insoluble fiber, and so it does not get digested by us. Maybe the bacteria might use it a bit, but for the most part that's just going to pass right through us. So where do we find starch? We find starch in things like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, cereal, crackers, pastries, and we find starch in many other places. So there are many vegetables, peas and carrots and corn, etc. But these are just sort of some of the high starch items that we tend to eat and that also tend to cause us problems because they're probably maybe a little bit too delicious and a little bit hard to resist. So let's now sort of bring this together in terms of what happens when we eat some starch. And so I'd like to do is show you some information about Mary's crackers. So I just got this out of my pantry. This is the type of cracker that we're eating these days. They're pretty good, but they're not super addictive. And so I'll show you the nutrition label on it. And so it's 1 serving size. And here I put into a little baggie. This is 13 crackers, so that gives you an idea. And that's a decent amount, especially if you had some cheese or something with it. So it's a good serving size. And you'll see that it's 21 grams of carbohydrate, and then dietary fiber is 3 grams, and there's 0 grams of sugar. So what that means is we can subtract the fiber from the total carbohydrate. And so 21 minus 3, we get 18. So 18 grams of starch is what I expect to be in these 13 crackers here. So 18 grams of starch. Okay, so if starch is glucose, then that means that we've got 18 grams of glucose coming in. Well, what did I say it was? Oh, it was only 5 grams of glucose in our whole body? Oh, well, that's pretty amazing then, because if you eat 18 grams, that just all of a sudden is going to super jack up the amount of glucose that's in your blood. And that's what happens when we eat starchy food, and that's totally normal. However, what we also want is to have a very normal insulin response. And so I've got a graph here. In white, I'm showing just roughly what it looks like when you eat a bunch of starch. And so you're going to have your glucose, your blood glucose level is going to rapidly go up. But then shortly, like just almost immediately after your body senses that you've just eaten some glucose, you're going to, your pancreas is going to release some insulin, and that's going to help bring that glucose level right back down. And so if you recall, what happens there is that the insulin then helps cells open up a door to basically let the glucose in, and so that's why the glucose will drop back down. And so I do have a marking on this. I've got this line right here, and this line is basically the 5 grams per 5 liters of blood that we have in our bodies. And this level right here is fairly, is where we sort of want to be. That's the equivalent of 100 milligrams per deciliter of glucose. And so if you want to know how much glucose you've got in your blood, you can get one of these little gizmos. And I just got this one from Walgreens, and it's not very expensive. You also have to buy some strips with it, and you put the strip in one end. You have to prick your finger, put a little blood onto the strip, and then just pretty cool. It'll tell you how much glucose you have in your blood. So this 100 milligram per deciliter mark, so this 5 gram for your whole body mark, that is a kind of an important spot to be aware of. And that is that if your resting blood glucose is at this level or below, then you're considered healthy. But if your resting blood glucose level is higher than this, you're in the pre-diabetic phase. And if it's higher than 125 milligrams per deciliter, then that's the diabetic range. And so what that means is that your blood glucose levels are just naturally just staying high, and that's because your pancreas is either not able to release the insulin like it needs to in order to get your glucose levels to come down, or your cells have become resistant to the insulin and they're no longer opening up in order to let the glucose in. So either way, that's not good, because what happens then is that this glucose level ends up staying high and it doesn't drop back down like it's supposed to. So in my next videos, we'll talk about this a little bit more and talk a little bit more about why it's a problem to have high blood glucose levels. All right, thanks so much for watching.